Hello and welcome to a Thursday night football showdown breakdown. Derek Carr against, we don't know, Cody, as always, joined by Cody Main. How's it going?
Yeah, it's not often that it's 3:30 Eastern and we don't know who the starting quarterback for an NFL team is going to be. So this should be an interesting one to break down. And for everyone watching this this analysis might just be void by the time lock rolls around.
Yeah, I'm not sure it matters too much, does
Yeah,
it? Like,
yeah,
obviously, like you want to be playing a quarterback typically, but we don't know if it's going to be Baker. We don't know if it's going to be John Walford. I get that. I think the outputs for the players would be somewhat similar, right? Like I get the narrative that Baker doesn't really know the plays. They could go more run heavy because Baker just got here. He's only been with the team for 48 hours. I get all that, but they're going to be down in this game most likely. Like, how are they just going to hand the ball off every play? So I don't know. I'm not sure it's too different for the skill guys, Walford versus Baker, but yeah, I get it. Okay. We don't often see slates where nobody wants to click a single player on one of the teams. Like we have bad teams on Showdown all the time. There's always someone that gets steamed up on the bad team. There's always someone that you can make a case for. I'm not sure you can make a case for anyone on the Rams to click here. Obviously, they have completely waved the white flag both offensively and defensively. No Stafford, no Cooper Kupp, no Aaron Donald. It's just a total, no Allen Robinson. It's just a total dust ball situation. I don't know, Cody. This seems really unique. What do you think about this matchup and slate as a whole?
yeah. Usually, you think that these roster construction projections are driven by the spread, driven by the total, driven by kind of our feel for the game, but mostly it comes down to the slate specific dynamics. And what I mean by that is price. What I mean by that is projections. Uh, and, and yeah, I mean, it's a 6.5 point spread wherever you look. And it feels more like some of these slates that we've seen recently where it's almost 2 touchdown spread because no one wants to play Rams. And part of that is because of just the overall projectable volume for this offense. Part of that is because of some of the unknowns, but DraftKings didn't really do us any favors with the pricing. I think the most popular options on this Rams side are going to be some of the cheaper guys, and that's really going to facilitate a very obvious roster construction for both cash game contest and small and large field tournaments. You're going to see the field really heavily favor those expensive options on the Raiders side and bring it back with one of these cheap Rams options. And it's gonna set up for opportunities in tournaments if you're willing to get unique, and you're going to have to kind of stomach some of this in order to create unique lineups. But I think flipping the script tonight is interesting. Maybe the Rams keep it close, and even if they don't, maybe we just go with one of those more expensive Rams options as opposed to completely punting it off to fit in these really expensive Raiders guys.
I'll say two things. First, the Raiders duos, in other words, lineups that include Jacobs and Adams, Devontae Adams, even without Derek Carr, that's been shipping main slates, right? Like, forget about
Yeah.
Showdown. Playing those guys together has been shipping main slates like consistently all season. People are going to be falling all over themselves to play both Devontae and Jacobs together here tonight. And then, as Cody said, if you do that, you're going to have to play a cheap Ram. So, I mean, that is by far going to be the most popular way to start. And honestly, like, my first instinct is to start that way also, like play Adams, play Jacobs, play a cheap Ram, and then probably fill it in with some other Raiders. That's what I think everybody's going to do. You see that there as part of the roster construction. So, yeah, interesting slate for sure. Derek Carr at the quarterback position, I think, is probably priced appropriately relative to his ceiling. In other words, we've seen really solid games from Derek Carr. Derek Carr rarely breaks a slate, right? There's not many 30 balls and 40 balls in Derek Carr's range, but there are a ton of 15 to 25 balls out of Derek Carr. And it's going to be pretty valuable in this slate. It is hard to fit Carr, Adams, and Jacobs all together, but I think not impossible. Cody, what do you think about handling Derek Carr tonight?
Yeah, there's two separate ways to look at this. One from a cash game perspective, where I think Carr is kind of a must because of some of the stone minimum options we have on not just the Rams side, but also on the Raiders side, who we'll get to when we get to some of these skill position guys. But from a tournament perspective, I actually think because of what you mentioned, when you play Adams and Jacobs, and particularly with one of those guys at captain and the other one in flex, it is hard to build good lineups around them with Carr also in the flex. And so what I think that's going to result in is less flex ownership on Carr in Captain Adams lineups. And I think that might be a mistake. I don't think it's necessarily going to be unique, but I think it'll be less utilized than it normally is when we have a captain wide receiver and not being paired with his quarterback in the flex. So what I'm going to be doing in optimizer runs is boosting Derek Carr's base projection when I have Adams in flex, and that'll probably sacrifice a little bit of Josh Jacobs ownership. But I think if I'm assuming that, we get a wide receiver who is $12,400 as the optimal captain, it's more likely that his quarterback is carried along with him, even if, the range of outcomes this season has been between 18 and 20 points. I think we might get, a performance that could come above that. And even if it doesn't, we get situations where he's still in a winning lineup. So cash game lock for me. I still want to find the money to get to Derek Carr with the other studs in the lineup. And then for tournaments, I think it might be a little bit unique to get him alongside Devontae Adams.
Yeah, a couple things here. First, I think a lot of people are going to say, well, how much are the Raiders going to have to throw? And that's kind of a dangerous game because this line opened 6, and I was actually surprised that it opened so low. I mean, again, I think the the Rams have completely waved the white flag, but it only opened 6. It did creep up to 6.5. I think it's going to close probably closer to 7, but that is not like a complete blowout line. And also, not many people played Geno last week against the Rams, and honestly, I was one of them. I didn't play any Geno stuff on the main slate. And I was like, man, there's no way he's going to be pushed. They're going to establish it. I mean, Geno ended up throwing 39 times. I almost lost the game to the Rams, did the Seahawks. And so weird things happen in the NFL, especially on a short week. I'm not writing this off like, oh, Carr and Devontae Adams are not going to be pushed in this game whatsoever. On the other side, it is 3:40 p.m. Eastern right now. As Cody said, we still don't have a starting quarterback. Why don't you lay out kind of the possible outcomes here for the Rams quarterback situation? And we will, I assume, get some reporting. Schefter and those guys are at the game, I think. And I think that we'll have word on who the starter is. So, Cody, why don't you walk the people through what you think the possible outcomes are for Rams quarterback and how you're going to handle it?
Yeah, right now we're kind of just trying to account for the risk that Baker Mayfield either comes into the game or does start the game. So you don't see him on the table there, but you can see John Walford's 12.5 projection is even lower than you would expect from John Walford. It's because we have 20% of the team's passing attempts going to Baker Mayfield. We'll get Mike to update the table so subscribers can see that on the table there. And like you mentioned, we should have this news by an hour and a half before lock on who is going to end up being the starting quarterback for the Rams. Right now, the reason why we're questioning it is because John Walford is supposedly dealing with a neck injury, is supposed to be playing through a neck injury. We just don't know. And I think if we get Baker Mayfield starting, and Mike would be better to talk about this, but we might adjust some of the play calling inputs, but maybe the efficiency comes up. I think as a whole, as you kind of alluded to, like, we're not making sweeping adjustments just because Baker Mayfield's going to be starting this game. And we shouldn't be assuming just because he's starting off of, joining the team 48 hours prior, that all of a sudden this team is just going to run on 95% of their offensive snaps. So I still think, given the spread, given the offensive game environment, we should expect reasonable pass volume, but I think there are reasons to question that it could reach, the 60% plus that we've seen from Sean McVay-led offenses in the past. So it's one thing to keep in mind. I'm sure we'll adjust one way or another, when we get that official word, but it is truly up in the air at this point. I think you're on mute, Adam.
It's funny they priced Baker at $9K ahead of Walford at $8,800. And also, the reason that Baker's not showing the table, we just need to change his team tag here, but he is part of the player pool. Again, Baker is $9K on this slate. Do you think he'll be playing a Rams quarter, whoever gets announced as the starter? Like, I don't even know how much we can expect out of these guys as a starter. It's just so broken.
Yeah, I don't think they're a cash game necessity, whoever it becomes.
Yeah.
And I'm really struggling to get myself onto a Rams pass catcher where, at captain particularly, or multiple pass catchers in the flex. And those would be the lineups where I'd be more interested in a quarterback. I will say, to your point about Baker being $200 more expensive than Walford, it's going to result in lower ownership on Baker, even though we already have projected on Walford. If the news comes late, first of all, and the fact that he's $200 more expensive isn't going to allow for that perfect 1v1 swap. So if you aren't rebuilding or going through each individual lineup, which I don't know how much of a more casual field we'll be doing, like, Baker could come in sub 20% because of that $200 difference and because the news could come super late. So maybe at that point it gets a little bit more interesting, but I'm having a really tough time getting there.
Okay. Let's go to the running back position. The best fantasy running back of the season has been Josh Jacobs by a wide margin. This calf thing, I'm kind of tilted in. Like, I don't mean to question whether guys are hurt or not or whatever. I'm just frustrated because I would have played Jacobs probably the last couple weeks, and I didn't because I was like, if there's a 5% chance, there's a 10% chance that his calf thing is real, it acts up, they limit him. It's just not worth it, right? But he not only has he played, he's racked up like 450 yards from scrimmage since he hurt his calf on that Friday before. I guess that was week 12. So I don't think we can really have any concerns. I don't know. It's a short week, though. He's on the injury report again. He's very, very, very expensive for running back. I mean, 12.4 is a massive tag for running back. It's a really, really tough fade at this point. And I'll say this too. Rams rush defense is very, very good. Now you can make the case this is not the Rams rush defense. There's no Aaron Donald. They're missing a couple other defenders as well. But for what it's worth, this rush defense has been pretty good. And they were doing a reasonable job, I guess, on the Seattle guys, even though Seattle didn't try to run a ton after Kenneth Walker's injury. So anyways, Cody, what do you think about handling a very expensive Josh Jacobs tonight?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in play here, and as like you try to go through this, you're going to have to take stands on Jacobs, Carr, Adams. You can't fit everybody in every lineup, and especially if you're trying to build through a portfolio of tournament lineups, you're trying to build bear bull cases for some of these guys. And for Jacobs, I think it's a little bit easier to make that case to opt towards the fade route as opposed to just jamming him in every lineup. You mentioned the price tag; he's 12.4. It's the most expensive showdown running back we've had all season, which seems improbable in and of itself, looking back to the way we treated this guy throughout draft season. But the role has been sick. So I think if you're trying to build a case for making a fade on Jacobs, it comes down to question marks about his health and the short week, and just the fact that maybe he doesn't do quite enough to pay off that lofty price tag. Not that he just outright fails, but maybe just doesn't do enough to get there at 12.4. So I'm always looking for a reason to fade these guys that, really need to get 100 yards on the ground and find the end zone. Kind of he's not necessarily Derrick Henry-esque, but he kind of in that same vein that he's going to have to do a lot with his legs and find the end zone in order to pay off that price tag. At 78% total ownership and 26% captain ownership, I want to find ways to come in under that and try and prioritize some of these other guys that I think offer, better leverage.
Straight up for you, who do you prefer between Jacobs and Devontae Adams?
Yeah, I think for me it's Adams. And you mentioned some of the stuff with maybe the field not expecting the Raiders to have to pass as much. We're not going to get any sort of ownership discount on Devontae Adams, but I think if there's one of these guys that gets juiced up in tournament ownership and one guy gets squeezed a little bit, I think Adams, because he's $400 more expensive because of the projected game environment, Adams might be the guy that comes in just a little bit lower owned.
Yeah, I prefer Adams too. And people are going to say, "Oh, Jalen Ramsey." Jalen Ramsey has not had a good year, man. I mean, and I think the chemistry between Devontae Adams and Derek Carr is so outrageous. Devin brings up a good question. Do you need Jacobs if he scores 16 points? It's always like some number that people come up with where it's really, really hard. On main slate, if you told me Jacobs was getting 16 points at this ownership and this salary, it's no question, fade, easy. But on Showdown, 16 points might still be enough to be in the optimal. I don't know here, Cody. If I told you Jacobs got 16, would you play or fade?
Yeah, I would fade at 16. I think at that point, you just have to hope that enough players priced below him come in close enough that his salary just isn't worth it. And then you hope that, the Cars and Devontae Adamses of the world separate.
Yeah. Okay. I did want to bring up Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah has played, Josh Jacobs. One of the reasons that people were down on Josh Jacobs before the season was I thought that they would play a strict pass catching back a la James White in New England. I thought about Josh McDaniels would do that with Amir Abdullah in Las Vegas. However, Jacobs played so well that they were like, screw it, man. We're just going to use Josh Jacobs as a third down back also. That does not mean that Amir Abdullah won't get in the game. We have him for 5.3 points here, and maybe that could be light if you think the spread is light. In other words, if it turns into a blowout, you'll see more Abdullah, you'll see more Zamir White. So I definitely think both these guys are in play. I prefer Abdullah, but Zamir would be like, let's say they're up 30-7 or something. I think it would be more Zamir than Abdullah at that point. Amir is more of the pass catching in when the game is closer type stuff. So he's not cheap though. 3K for Amir Abdullah is a lot. What do you think about the secondary guys here?
Yeah, I think Amir Abdullah is an interesting large field tournament play just as a pure leverage stance on kind of game script. He is going to be the guy that's out there for long down and distance. Probably not going to play 100% of the 2-minute snaps, but is more likely to be involved in those situations. At 3K, you could see him getting there on just a couple of series. Maybe he ends up catching a touchdown pass, which seems unlikely, but that's what happens in these showdown slates. Zamir, I think, is a guy that actually makes more sense in a complete lotto style MME set where you're playing him alongside Jacobs and just hoping this game does get out of hand and he maybe gets the whole fourth quarter or something like that. Also unlikely, but where you're getting paid off with a big ownership discount, then I think that's okay in those type of contests.
The other side has been a struggle, man. I mean, all year it's been a struggle to figure out what they're going to do at running back. We've been looking at props on these guys for the last, I don't know, 24 hours or so, and we just can't get settled on the exact split, how it's going to be. We just don't know. I do think that they played really well last week, and that was with Cam Akers as the lead back. And I think that's enough for Cam Akers to enter this game as a lead back also. However, in passing situations, I think they pretty clearly prefer Kieran Williams. And so, I thought like the over on like, I think it was 12 and a half or 13 and a half receiving yards on Kieran was okay in the idea that Kieran is the pass down back. I think they're going to be losing the game. Walford and Baker are going to check down a ton. And so Kieran at 5,400, I think I prefer over Akers. But if you think the Rams play well, like they did last week, clearly Akers to me is the base back that they prefer. So I don't think a lot of people are going to click on either of these guys. We have 20 and 25%. I think people will try to find cheaper. I could see these guys coming in even less because once you start playing Jacobs and Adams and Carr, whatever, like 7,800 for Cam Akers is just like not an option. So what do you think about these Rams guys?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you want to play this game to be a little bit closer than maybe the rest of the field is expecting it to be, I think Akers is a really intriguing option. I think you nailed the split, and I think that's how it's going to go. Although we continue to hear that this team likes Kieran Williams, but then they use Cam Akers as kind of the base down back, and they have very distinct roles. We know that Akers is going to be out there on first and second down when they're running the ball. He's going to be the guy that they want to hand it off to. Near the goal line, he's going to be the guy that they want to go to. So in close game scripts where we think this rush rate might be elevated a little bit, I think Akers is a really interesting option. The 7-8 price tag is actually nice. I if it was closer to the Kieran Williams price tag, I think the ownership might get elevated there a little bit more. But I actually like the fact that his price tag is a little bit tough to stomach. So I like Cam Akers, and you're right. I think Kieran is the guy that naturally fits the expected game script. He's going to be out there for long down and distance, 2-minute snaps, and could certainly get a couple of dump offs and take one.
I think in the hand build stuff, I think Kieran's ownership will be higher than Akers.
Yeah.
I mean, it just fits so much better. And on full PPR, I mean, it's just, yeah. Okay. Let's go to wide receiver position. We can start with the Raiders, where obviously it's been all Devontae Adams. Now, Mac Hollins is out there a ton. Like Devontae Adams is what it is. 12-8. We already talked about Devontae Adams. I don't think Jalen Ramsey's an issue. We both prefer Devontae Adams to Josh Jacobs here at pretty much the same price. It gets more interesting as you go further down. Mac Hollins has chances, man. Like he is out there every single snap. He's just not a great target earner. He's not a great player, but in similar vein to Zay Jones, like he can get it done. And Mac Hollins' targets are also deep down the field, unlike Zay Jones. And so when Mac Hollins actually does something, he usually does it in a big way. You saw them run a flea flicker for Mac Hollins not that long ago. He's certainly not cheap here at 7,400. And so again, in all these stars lineups, you're not going to be able to play Mac Hollins. Also, what do you think about him and anything else on Raiders wide receivers?
Yeah, Mac is another guy that's a tough click at 7,400 because of the fact that he doesn't really separate from some of the other guys that are 4 or 5, up to 6K. And because of that, when we can save the salary and we can fit the stars in lineups, I think Mac Hollins is going to be a guy that frequently gets overlooked tonight. The target share hasn't been bad. It's just you're always looking at his target share with respects to what Devontae Adams is doing. So 21% target share on the season without Renfro and Waller, 25.5% air yard share. He has opportunities to get it done, and he's kind of another guy like Carr that isn't necessarily posting these big ceiling games, though he kind of has the opportunities to do so. It's more the teens up to the 20s range for Mac Hollins, and it feels more like a safe floor than a guy that's got a big ceiling. And I'm talking about struggling to find captain options outside of Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, and Derek Carr. And I think Mac could be one of those guys, particularly in large field tournaments. If Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams fail to pay off their price tag, it could be because Mac Hollins steals 1 or 2 touchdowns. So, I think in larger field stuff, there is some case to be made for him as a captain option. Certainly makes sense in the flex with Derek Carr at captain. But he is going to be a tough click at 7,400, given the fact that we want to pay up for these stars.
So the reason that I like playing Mac and not playing one of the other guys, particularly Adams, is like when Mac hits, he hits in a way that like is huge and does not allow plays for the Raiders. In other words, like a 60-yard touchdown to Mac Hollins, you might have lost 3 Devontae Adams catches there and 4 Josh Jacobs carries and 2 targets or something like that because Mac Hollins caught a 60-yard bomb, So like when he hits, it really hurts the other guys. The one that I think is going to come through in a lot of optimals, I think somebody already mentioned in chat, they saw that Keelan Cole at 200 and 3.6 point projection allows you to fit everything. If you play Keelan Cole with the stars, that's going to be insanely popular. Like that combo, like some 5-1s with that include Keelan Cole and obviously include Jacobs and Adams and Carr. That's going to be insanely popular. So I don't know, man. I feel like Keelan Cole is going to be over-owned, but I get it at 200. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Keelan Cole is someone that I'm looking at in cash game contests is just leads me to believe that he's certainly going to be overowned, especially in smaller field hand build stuff. He's just going to be a guy that's easy to click on. You get in the 2 studs, you maybe get in Derek Carr in that lineup, and then you figure out the rest. You have to start setting some rules with these lineups that have Keelan Cole in them, because if he's going to be, coming through with 15-20% or more ownership in some of these contests, and you're playing him alongside a 75% owned Adams, a 75% owned Josh Jacobs, all of a sudden you are playing a very similar roster construction to the rest of the field. So maybe you leave a little bit of salary remaining in those lineups. Maybe you force in a unique piece. But I think, yeah, if you're playing Keelan Cole in tournaments, you need to be very cognizant of what you're playing around him. But the underlying metrics are, pretty strong for him. He's another guy that's out there for 75% of the team's dropbacks. He's just not earning targets. And, you either he's just not a target earner, which is probably the case, or it's going to flip a little bit. And, maybe he gets 2 or 3 targets in this game, and it's not going to take much to pay off a $200 price tag.
Yeah, I mean, Keelan Cole the last 4 weeks has run 33, 31, 28, and 22 routes. In other words, he's running a ton of routes is Keelan Cole for someone priced at 200. He just has not been able to earn a target here at all. On the other side, and I brought up this screen here just to show that there's not much below 1,000 besides Cole. And I guess we're going to talk about Austin Trammell here. You can maybe make a case for Bryson Hopkins. We already talked about Zamir, but yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot. Like even guys that people want to click, like maybe Brandon Powell or Scow or Tutu, are very, very expensive relative to their talent level. Now, the question though is, because the Rams have absolutely no one, no quarterback, no wide receiver, no offensive line, no nothing, you get like every down starting wide receivers for very cheap, but still no one wants to click on them, right? I mean, I don't want to play Van Jefferson at 6,400. I don't want to play 150-pound Tutu Atwell at 4,400. Ben Scow is on the injury report. I guess the Trammell dude is an interesting punt at 600. I can't say I know a lot about him. What do you think about Rams wide receivers? Do you have a favorite here? Anything else on them?
Yeah, if I wasn't scared of losing my job, I would admit that I bet a Van Jefferson over at 37.5 receiving yards, because I looked at this target competition, and that was the first thing that stood out to me. I think someone in this wide receiver room can find success, whether it's John Walford, whether it's Baker Mayfield, whoever it is under center. This Raiders secondary has been so bad, and given the expected offensive environment for the Rams offense, 6.5 point, 7-point spread, we should expect at least some dropbacks for this unit. Van Jefferson was the guy that stood out to me as like, hey, he's at least an NFL caliber wide receiver. Over the last 2 weeks, without Allen Robinson, without Cooper Kupp, he's earned a 22.5% target share, 35% air yard share. Like, things seem to line up a little bit for Van Jefferson. And I think DraftKings appropriately priced him, well ahead of the other options in this offense. And I hope that at least keeps his ownership in check. I think from just a base perspective, he is the one guy that, whether it be as a bring back in 4-2 or 5-1 constructions, or a guy that I might even try and talk myself into as potentially having that type of range of outcomes for a captain style performance. Van Jefferson is a guy that is at least most exciting to me in this, otherwise bleak Rams wide receiver core.
Yeah, I was going to say that Tutu was probably my favorite, just because I don't think they're going to be able to sustain drives, right? Like, I don't think they're going to be able to like rip off a 10-play drive and to get a bunch of passes. I think it's just got to be like 1 or 2 huge plays to Tutu if they're going to do it. Not that I want to click Tutu at all, but I'm just saying, like, the way I think that they hit would be some fluke thing and Tutu getting a target down the field and making it happen. I mean, yeah.
And on Tutu, I will point out, Winky was hanging out in the Discord, and there's some coach speak on Tutu, and maybe this team, the kids are saying, what is it the kids are saying, that this team is quiet quitting. Is that what we're using now? Like Tutu is a guy that they could use more, as a guy that Sean McVay has already regretted not using more earlier in the season. I could see him being out there more often, and the way that he scores, 18.9 yard ADOT, could certainly pay off his price tag with just 1 or 2 receptions.
So Austin Trammell is an undrafted rookie out of Rice. He's 5'10", 185, and I believe he was drafted by the Falcons, not even the Rams. And so, but if you're looking for like an ownership pivot off of Keelan Cole, at least Trammell is close in price. Trammell only ran 8 routes last week. We don't have a lot of optimism on him running much more this week. As you see there, we only have 2.5 points, but I just want to put that out there. He's certainly a way worse play than Keelan Cole, but just wanted to put it out there that someone else down there in that range. All right. Tight end, I think, is interesting, man. I mean, we just bet an under on Tyler Higbee. Foster Moreau's role has been awesome while Darren Waller's out. He has not had a big game. Doesn't mean that he can't. So I like Moreau. Higbee is a tougher one for me to get on. I think that his role was already like shaky with Stafford in there. And now with these other dust balls in there, it's just he's not going to be able to get a big playoff, I don't think. So probably out on Higbee. I'm interested in Moreau. Hopkins, I think, is another pivot off of Keelan Cole that I think is worth mentioning. What do you think about the tight end stuff, Cody?
Yeah, I think both of these expensive guys are kind of just touchdown or touchdown or bust tournament dart throws, given the 6'6" and 6'2" respective price tags. If they were priced more in that 2-2 Ben Skoranek type range in the mid 4s, even up to 5K, I think you could make a case for it. But they're both really low ADOT guys. I don't think that you mentioned the Rams not being able to sustain drives. Like Higbee needs a bunch of catches given the ADOT that he's running to pay off this price tag. And I don't really want to bet on that. So I'd prefer to bet on some of these other options that I think have big playability on the Rams side. Moreau, I think, is an interesting second option as parts of like Derek Carr double stacks. I think that could make some sense. He could certainly find the end zone and pay off that price tag there. The thing with Higbee that makes Hopkins interesting is he dealt with that knee injury in week 12, was removed from the injury report in week 13, only got up to a 54% route participation rate in week 13. So if it stays, around that range, 50, 55%, and doesn't get back up to, the full-time role that we saw earlier in the season, then you could see Hopkins out there more. And I think Hopkins is another guy like Trammell that makes as an interesting pivot off of a more popular Keelan Cole.
Yeah, Bryson Hopkins is an athletic dude. I think he was a 4th round pick a couple years ago, if I recall correctly. And again, $200 pivot off of Keelan Cole, I think, is at least interesting. The defensive stuff, everybody's going to want to play the Raiders, man. I know they're expensive, but I feel like we could even be light here at 33.9. I mean, I've been trying to play defenses against the Raiders on main slate, against the Rams on main slate all year, and that was with Stafford. Now with this quarterback situation, it's even more appealing to play them. I don't know, man. Is 34% too much? And do you think it'll actually come in higher than that on Raiders, D?
Yeah, I've got the sense that it's going to come in higher. We actually have them for the 3rd highest overall captain ownership on the slate. I think that could certainly come up in more casual fields as well. You have the offensive line situation plus the quarterback situation combining for like this perfect storm of people wanting to click on this Raiders defense. So for me, I'm mostly going to be out. I will probably play into some popular 5-1 constructions if I can find a unique Ram bring back or find a unique way to play the 5 side on the Raiders. And in those 5-1 Raiders stacks, I would be more willing to eat that ownership on the Raiders DST. But man, it's going to be pretty owned, I think, tonight.
I mean, we have Daniel Carlson for $1,000 less as a mean projection more, right? And not saying that, it's really hard to project defense. Obviously, that can be flipped completely on its head. All it takes is one strip sack for a touchdown. The projection looks dumb. But if you don't get that, if you don't get any defensive touchdowns, if you don't get a bunch of turnovers, you just get like a 10-point game or something from the Rams and maybe a couple sacks. Obviously, Raiders defense will look really bad, especially when Carlson, again, is 1,000 less and projects for more there. What do you think about the kickers and also Rams defense, if you dare?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kickers look fantastic. Kickers in cash games, certainly Daniel Carlson makes a ton of sense. If you just look at the players priced around Daniel Carlson, you have Tutu Atwell, who's $200 more expensive. You have Ben Skoranek, who's $600 more expensive. You get up to Kieran Williams at 5,400, and all three of those options have a lower base projection. So I think from a cash game contest perspective, Daniel Carlson makes a ton of sense. That is going to inflate his ownership in tournament contests as well. So just be mindful of that if you're playing him in tournaments. And I think Matt Gay will come in with a little bit less ownership, but similar situation here. He's 4K and projects just as well, if not better, than the pass catching options that are more expensive than him. So you could see 20 to 25% on Gay, but I think it will come in a little bit lower than Carlson. This is still a Raiders offense that I know Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs have been awesome, but at times this offense has struggled. At times Derek Carr has struggled and is certainly willing to take sacks and turn the ball over. So at sub 10% ownership, particularly if like guys like Donald are back. And, I think that could make for an interesting play in contrarian type game scripts. I like the 2-4 where you have 2 Raiders, 4 Rams, and playing the Rams defense in those type of lineups.
Okay. All right. We got about 3 or 4 minutes here. Take as many questions as we can before we get to the flag plants. Let me see what we got here. I saw some questions earlier. Let's see here. Jacobs or Adams in cash captain. Have you thought about cash captain, Cody?
Cash captain, I think I'm on the Jacobs side. The $400 helps a little bit. The lineup that I'm on right now does not have the salary to get up to Devontae Adams. If you find a lineup that you like that has the salary available, I would prefer Adams, but prefer Jacobs right now.
Okay. Let's see.
And if you want to know how popular the 5-1s are going to be tonight, the cash game lineup that I'm looking at is a 5-1. So,
yeah, of course.
I mean, if that tells you anything.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, Quentin says, Raiders studs and value Rams wideouts, of course. No, the weed is not too strong, Quentin. You have that is going to be the most popular lineup. George says he likes Van Jefferson, 2nd round pick with talent and high ADOT. I think that's reasonable. Devin says, do you think a Rams receiver will separate himself from the rest of the team, or do you see targets being spread around equally? I kind of think it's spread equally. I know some people like Van Jefferson. I get that take. I'm not even sure like he's capable, man. I don't know. I have not been impressed with Van Jefferson whatsoever in his NFL career, but I don't know, Cody. Do you think anybody separates?
Yeah, I said I feel like he's the one NFL caliber wide receiver on this team, but that's because you look at the options around him. Ben Skoranek is a converted special teamer. Tutu Atwell is 175-pound, just deep threat gadgety type guy, and then Austin Trammell is a team preseason Hall of Famer. So like, there's a reason why he looks like the only capable pass catcher on this team, but even he doesn't jump off the page at you.
Jason says his worst performing lineups always have a bunch of studs, and then one of these 200 guys with a 0 always kills me. Yeah, I think it's interesting. If I was MME broing tonight, I might X out Keelan Cole. Like, I don't know, maybe that's too crazy, but I might do it just because you're immediately going to get unique on your stars lineups if you don't have Keelan Cole. What do you think about that, Cody?
Yeah, I looked at Cole and it was a 78% route participation rate over the last couple of weeks, and he's got a 5.3% targets per route run rate. So like if this guy got 2 targets and just didn't catch either of them, it would be a completely normal outcome for him.
Jason says the short bro narrative is in play. He's referring, I believe, to Baker Mayfield and Tutu Atwell, who are both undersized for their position. I don't know how viable that is. George says, is it viable to play Captain Van Jefferson with no Rams QB because both might play? This is where it starts to get tough, man. And that's why I think we're going to see even more Raiders than usual because we don't even know who the cat, like, let's say you have some take, you like Van Jefferson, you don't even know who to pair him with. You know what I mean? Like, so it's going to make it even harder to click Rams until we have this news. But yeah, what do you think about, once we get the news, what do you think about playing Captain Jefferson? Do you have to have either Walford or Baker in there?
I don't think you have to, but for me, when you're already saying, okay, you've got Captain Jefferson in, so you're telling yourself that Van Jefferson is going to be the optimal captain tonight. If he's the optimal captain, it's more likely that the starting quarterback on his team is also in that winning lineup. So I would, if you're running an MME set, or if you just want to, adjust this yourself, I would certainly boost it, but I would not necessarily lock it, for lack of a better term. If you're hand building, maybe 5 or 10 lineups, then about half of those lineups that have Van Jefferson would have the quarterback in the flex with him.
Matt says if you have Captain Devontae lineups, play them with Carlson or Gay. The correlation stuff between kicker and wide receiver actually is not, I don't think it's a negative correlation. Like, I don't mind playing Devontae Adams with Carlson at all here. But yeah, I don't really have a take on Carlson versus Gay and Devontae lineups. What any take there, Cody?
Yeah, I actually looked into this because I know this question is common, particularly when you have, one team's pass catcher or quarterback. Do you play his same team kicker, or do you play the opposing team's kicker? Historically, it has been slightly better to play the same team kicker in those lineups, but it's very minimal. It's almost a coin flip. So I think Daniel Carlson's $200 more expensive. If you've got the money, it would be a slight preference for me to play Carlson ahead of Gay.
Couple kicker questions here. Pat says both kickers in single entry tournaments, and Easy DFS says, are you more or less likely to go double kicker in GPP than normal? What do you think about the double kicker stuff tonight?
Yeah, I think double kicker is okay. It's also the cash game construction that I'm looking at right now, so I think it's going to be relatively popular. I think in tournaments, small and large, I would just be hoping that one of these guys in that similar price range can outscore at least one of these kickers. And the guys that I'm thinking of would be Tutu Atwell, Ben Skoranek, up to Kieran Williams, or just flipping the build and just saying, hey, I just don't need this price range in my lineups tonight.
Yeah. I'm not sure people are going to play Matt Gay. Like in hand builds, I don't think people are going to click Matt Gay very much, but yeah. Pat says if Mac Hollins is your captain, are you completely fading Adams? I kind of think so, but you don't have to, And if I was making a lot of lineups, I certainly wouldn't make a rule like if Mac Hollins captain 0 Devontae Adams, I would not do that. But I kind of think that it's interesting play. The hope would be that Mac Hollins catches 2 bombs and Derek Carr only attempts 20 passes in the game because they got there on Mac Hollins bombs. So I don't know. What do you think about lineups that have Mac Hollins captain?
Yep, this is something that makes a lot of sense to do in the solver. I would be boosting Derek Carr's base projection in Captain Hollins lineups and docking Adams's base projection in Captain Hollins lineups, running the optimizer and seeing what it gives me. I would imagine that I'm still going to get a decent amount of Devontae Adams, but probably less so than if I just ran it normally. So in single entry hand builds type stuff, I think it's okay to fade Adams in Hollins lineups and just hope you do get that 2 touchdown or 8 for 101 type touchdown from Mac Hollins.
Yaknahu says, is this a spot where we would play a defense in the captain? So I'd love to play Raiders defense and captain, but we're talking about 15, maybe more % captain ownership here. And I think, Cody's done a lot of work on this. From a game theory perspective, could it hit tonight, Raiders captain? Sure. Is that optimal or the likeliest outcome? I don't think so. So what do you think about playing Raiders defensive captain?
Yeah. For me, it's going to be a no just because of that captain ownership. And this is something like the ownership model that I run for Showdown has historically struggled with accurately projecting captain ownership for DSTs because the model always wants it to be lower than it actually is. It's the 3rd highest right now. And I would almost guarantee that it's going to come in actually higher than I have projected right now, probably closer to 10% than the 6% that you're looking at. And for me, I'm just going to guess that it's way less likely to be optimal than 10% of the time.
Breaking news into the show, Ian Rappaport has tweeted that the Rams have called up Malcolm Brown from the practice squad. And I kind of think he might play tonight, although I haven't thought about it too much, but I could definitely see Malcolm Brown getting in there. So we'll talk with the projections team and get a projection out there if we think that Malcolm Brown is going to end up playing. But yeah, I just wanted to note that. Easy DFS, minimum one of Adams or Jacobs in every lineup. So it's interesting, obviously a lot of your lineups going to have both, but should you have any lineups that don't have either Devontae Adams or Jacobs? That would be a really tough fade for me. But what do you think about that? A lineup that doesn't have one of Adams or Jacobs?
It really frees you up to pretty much do whatever else you want in that lineup because you don't have to really worry about ownership at that point. I would imagine that like 95% of all lineups entered tonight are going to have at least one. So if you just decide to automatically fade both in a lineup, it's probably going to be unique as is. Man, I would imagine you're probably sacrificing just a little bit too much projection by not having either of them in a lineup for me to be comfortable with. But if you're playing the super large field stuff, you can really get away with anything.
God, I mean, the next closest skill player to these two guys is less than half. I mean, it's you don't see gaps like this. And so to not have one of them, you're going to be giving up a ton in projection, and I think I'd probably have one in every lineup. People love playing Captain DST because they like seeing their currently winnings at kickoff. Yeah. When I was playing NBA DFS a lot, there were a lot of people out there that would stack the first game. And I was like, why is everybody stacking the first game? And then somebody explained it to me. People like to think that like they're winning, like they're in first place. It can be done. So yeah, I get that. How much salary we leave on the table in tonight's game? I'm always willing to leave a ton in Showdown. Like, I don't care. I'll leave thousands on the table in Showdown, especially if you're playing large field stuff. But specifically to tonight, Cody, what do you think about leaving a lot of money on the table?
Yeah, running the ownership projection salary is actually really tight, and maybe that makes sense inherently just looking at the top of the board with Devontae and Jacobs. But you would think, some of these $200, $600 options in play, that salary wouldn't be as quite as tight as it is. But I think if you're leaving anything more than 400 or 500 on the table, you're going to be relatively at least have a good start towards being more unique.
Yep. All right. George points out the way that you get there if you fade both Adams and Jacobs. Jacobs gets hurt on the first play, and Adams only gets 5 for 40. Yeah, easy game. Okay. Skim says an interesting point. Malcolm Brown being active makes me think Baker will be active, and they'll go run heavy with all three backs. There's no doubt in my mind they want to go run heavy. Can they actually do it? I don't know. That would surprise me. But there's no doubt that they want to go run heavy. So yeah, I think we'll probably end up projecting Malcolm Brown for something. Devin says if Jacobs out or gets injured, will Zamir White get the majority of the workload or Abdullah? I think in that scenario, Zamir White would get 60 to 70% of the base work, and Amir Abdullah would get the rest of the base work and then also the pass down work. In other words, it'd be somewhat of a committee there, but yeah, I think Zamir would get a decent amount of the base work in that scenario. All right. Yeah, Easy points out that Malcolm Brown was active last week, only played special teams. So yeah, we'll see on the projection on Malcolm Brown. Okay. Flag plan time. We've gone long enough. Cody, I'm going to refresh this, but Cody, I will go ahead and give you the honors.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to figure out where you want to go on the Rams side, whether you're going 4-2, whether you're going 5-1, or you want to play different. I think figuring out this pass catching core is going to be very, 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 very important tonight and could be the key to the slate. I mean, I don't know if Van Jefferson would be a good wide receiver in a normal wide receiver core, but I don't think this is a normal wide receiver core. You have Ben Skoranek, who is a converted special teamer. You have Tutu Atwell, who is a gadget guy. Austin Trammell, Lance McCutcheon, all of these other guys that could potentially be called up and take snaps are all, career preseason guys. This is a guy that's got a 22.5% target share, 35% air yard share. I think they're going to want to run the ball, but like you said, they're going to have to throw the ball at some point. And I think Van is the guy that is going to get a majority of the team's targets tonight. So from the Rams side, give me Van Jefferson in the optimal lineup tonight.
All right. Van Jefferson. Oh boy. I was gonna say Tutu Atwell, but we can't
double up on the Rams.
We can't have Van Jefferson and Tutu Atwell as the flag plans. So I'm going off Tutu Atwell. I'm gonna go with the island tonight as leverage off of Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs, and mostly because I want to tweet out the meme that we did with my face next to I believe it's Val Kilmer in the island of Dr. Moreau, underrated movie. But anyways, I would go with the island being in the optimal lineup tonight. I don't know about optimal captain. I'm not sure the ceiling is there for Foster Moreau, but I think as part of the optimal lineup, I will go with Foster Moreau, similar to Greg Dulcich in that his role has been really good over the last 3 to 4 weeks. He just has not put it in the box score. You saw what Greg Dulcich did on Sunday. When you have that kind of usage, you at least have a chance to do it. Now, Foster Moreau is not nearly the athlete that Greg Dulcich is, but still, I think the role is at least somewhat similar, more inline stuff for Foster Moreau, but that's okay. So I'll go with Foster Moreau here. All right. Oh, my other flag plan is going to be Josh Jacobs, not part of the optimal tonight.
I like that one.
Yeah. Normally the flag plans are what is going to happen. I'll go with what's not going to happen. Josh Jacobs not in the optimal tonight. All right. That is going to do it for this Thursday Night Football Showdown breakdown. Appreciate you all being here. If you have not tried Establish the Run yet, we do have weekly and monthly options available. If you're just grifting here for free, at least hit the subscribe button. At least hit the subscribe button or the like button. The YouTube bros on our team will love it. Appreciate all of you. For Cody, for Gary, who's a little bit under the weather today, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.